Homer was the first to give these people a name. In the Iliad, he called them Phoenicians, meaning purple people, because they had the secret of dyeing cloth purple. But the Phoenicians did not call themselves by that name, nor was there ever a country called Phoenicia. Rather, there were autonomous city-states, Byblos, Berytus, Sidon, and Tyre, linked by maritime trade, a common language, and common gods. For a long time, the Phoenicians lived in the shadow of Egypt and Mesopotamia, which both demanded regular tribute. The Assyrians were particularly avaricious. It was not only the Assyrians. The Egyptians also treated the Phoenicians like vassals. King Chekerbal of Byblos had to pay a high tribute to the pharaoh, as did all the rulers of the Phoenician city-states. The Phoenicians were gifted craftsmen who made fine jewellery, magnificent silverware, and pottery. Their overlords coveted these luxuries. They also had rare, raw materials, such as incense and cedar. But times were changing. Chekerbal was tired of putting out his wealth for no return.
كفى هذا يدفعني إلى الجنون. لماذا نضع أنفسنا في هذا؟
آسف سيدي، ولكن من زمان والحال هكذا.
نعم، لكن هذا يجب أن يتغير والآن.
It was a time of change, with the Near East empires, such as Egypt, becoming embroiled in political crises, and sometimes even falling. The Phoenicians seized their opportunity. Egypt remained important for the Phoenicians, as trade with the pharaohs promised to be highly profitable. The Egyptians needed a great deal of wood for their temples and cult ships. The Phoenicians could supply it. Their famous cedar forests yielded particularly solid timber. An ancient Egyptian text tells of the journey of a priest named Wenamun. In 1100 BC, he went to Byblos to procure wood from the Phoenicians for a cult ship for the god Amun. But King Chekerbal reacted unexpectedly. The Egyptian definitely did not want to pay. He was hoping to get his timber free, as usual. But he hadn't reckoned with the Phoenician.
40 جرة من الذهب. 4 جرات من الذهب. والثوب.
هذا سخيف.
والورق. وجلد البقر.
هذا سخيف.
Chekerbal was playing for high stakes, and the odds were in his favour. From the 8th century BC, the Phoenicians' world was divided. The old trading metropolis of Tyre ruled in the east, while the west was increasingly dominated by Carthage. In the east, the Phoenicians were still called Phoenicians, but their relatives in the west came to be called Carthaginians, particularly by the Greeks. The Roman version of Phoenician was Punic. That is why there are 3 different names for these same people. Legend has it that Carthage was founded by the beautiful Princess Elissa, or Dido, after she fled from her native city of Tyre and her power-hungry brother Pygmalion. She landed in North Africa, on the Tunisian coast, where she acquired land from the chieftain to found a city, in a deal very much to her advantage. They agreed that her block of land could only be as large as the area encompassed by a cowhide. But the cunning Elissa had the hide cut into razor-thin strips so that they enclosed a huge area. On this land, she built Carthaginian, the new city. The city was carefully planned. It was surrounded by elaborate defences, including on the seaward side. The huge ring-shaped port dominated the spacious lower city, which contained the shops and homes of the ordinary people. The upper city rose on a hill behind a fortified wall of its own. Set well back, almost on the edge of town, it was the religious and political centre, with temples and luxurious villas for the trading magnates who made up the Carthage elite. The business of government was led by the Sophites, the chief magistrates of the city. Elected every year by the citizen assembly, they presided over meetings of the Senate. The first order of business was proposals for political decisions and new laws. These were discussed and voted on. They often related to trade agreements, the expansion of the fleet, or the establishment of new trading bases. The Carthaginians focused on territories close to the sea. This enabled them to build up a complex network of trade links. From southern Spain, they imported salted fish and silver. Carthage was a transit point for Greek ceramics being sent to the west. It imported tin from Galicia and possibly also from Britain. Slaves were another important commodity. The city exported purple cloth, metalwares and ceramics. It also sold its goods inland to the Berbers and all the way to sub-Saharan Africa, which paid in gold, precious stones and ivory. The Carthaginians and Phoenicians were renowned for their handicrafts. They are thought to have been the founders of glassblowing, and they were expert in working metal. The Old Testament speaks highly of their handiwork. Their bronze and silver bowls have been found in graves from Iraq to northern Italy. The upper classes of the ancient world prized their carved ivory. Few people know that these colonies developed over time into some of Europe's first cities. The Spanish city of Cadiz, founded around 1100 BC, is one of the oldest. In the 8th century BC, Malaga followed, and around 300 years later, the trading city of Granada. Cagliari in southern Sardinia, Trapani and Palermo in Sicily, as well as picturesque Sorrento on the mainland of Italy, were all founded by the Phoenicians. Each of these cities had its own gods. They were worshipped in numerous temples and in the tofits, or sanctuaries. The Carthaginians had their own sacred precinct. These steles contained symbols and images of the gods they worshipped. And the pantheon was large. But both the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians particularly favoured three deities: El, the leader of the gods, his consort Astarte, and their son Baal. El was the creator of the world and king of all the gods. Astarte was the goddess of heaven, war, seafaring, and love. Baal was sometimes the sun god. At other times, he looked after vegetation or healing. Gods adopted from other peoples included Isis and Osiris from Egypt and Demeter from Greece. The religion was open and multicultural. A stone's throw from Carthage's mysterious place of worship was the heart of the city, the harbour, admired by the whole Mediterranean world. Inside the entrance lay a huge basin for trading ships. Behind that was a well-protected and restricted naval area, the city's secret military harbour. It was ringed with covered berths with room for at least 200 warships. In the centre, on its own island, was the Carthaginian Admiralty. Large quantities of the individual segments were produced and then assembled on a modular system.
ماذا هناك؟
استمريت هكذا سأرسلك إلى البيت. شاهد؟ ها؟ فهمت؟
فهمت.
تعال معي.
It was a sophisticated system, able to churn out different types of ships one after another, and able to replace individual parts quickly and easily. Carthaginian warships had a shallow draft. They had to be light and manoeuvrable. In battle, the mast was laid flat and the ship relied on its rowers. That is why they had several banks of oars. The first bank of rowers sat in the belly of the ship, with other banks staggered behind them. A common type was the trireme, with 3 levels of rowers. The largest warships had as many as 5 levels, which required especially strict discipline. Often their ships had eyes painted on the bow, both to ward off ill luck and to find the way, as ships were seen as living creatures. At the very front was a bronze ram for attacking enemy vessels. For their trading expeditions, the Carthaginians used a different type of ship. It had a deeper draft than the warships, a high stern and a large square sail. And it had only 1 bank of rowers, if that. They had to be spacious as they carried goods and foodstuffs to faraway destinations on voyages lasting months. There had to be room for the crew as well. Because these ships had such big bellies, the Greeks dubbed them gorloi, tubs. Carthage's most famous explorer set off on his travels at the beginning of the 5th century BC. He is remembered as Hanno the Seafarer. Hanno set sail with 60 ships. A stele to his memory claimed that 30,000 people went with him. On such long voyages, the ships were typically laden with images of the gods, agricultural tools, seeds, and provisions.
أيها الأحمق، أيها البليد، إنها المرة الثالثة اليوم التي تفعل فيها هذا. أنت من فعل هذا؟ Every nook and cranny below deck was used for storage, because they wanted to sell or exchange goods everywhere they landed. So a Carthaginian ship was like a floating bazaar, and space had to be found for the crew as well. In Hanno's time, Carthage was the most powerful country in the Western Mediterranean, not least because of its numerous colonies. But their rivals, the Greeks, were increasingly influential in the Eastern Mediterranean. That is why the Carthaginians kept moving further west in search of new opportunities. Hanno's expedition was a complete success, although he and his crew encountered terrible fire mountains that set the stars ablaze. They fled from fur-clad coast dwellers who threw rocks at them. The hairy women they called gorillas were not quite as frightening, but they were scared of the warthogs. Hanno and his crew were often terrified. Still, despite their trials, they managed to do business, although they could barely make themselves understood south of what is now Mauritania. The Carthaginians quickly got used to the West African practice of silent trade, which generally avoided direct communication with the trading partner, probably in order to avoid arguments.
يا له من بليد.
The principle was very simple. First, the seller spread out his wares, and then the buyer did. Each trader took his time to look at what the other was offering. If both parties were satisfied with what they were getting, the goods changed hands. At about the same time as Hanno was discovering new areas on the West African coast, another admiral set sail, Himilco, perhaps in search of tin, the raw material for the Carthaginian metal industry. There was said to be an abundant supply of it on islands south of England. Some say the Phoenicians even sailed to America. There is no proof of this, but possibly they were history's first great explorers. Wherever they went, the Carthaginians and their Phoenician ancestors became famous for their best-known export, purple-dyed cloth. The first purple dye factories were built in Lebanon in the 2nd millennium BC. They later spread throughout the Phoenician world. The precious dye was obtained from the humble murex sea snail. The stench it gave off as the dye was produced was overpowering.
الرائحة جميلة هنا.
حقا تريدين أن أغلق عليك؟
سنرى.
According to legend, it was a god who discovered the sea snail's secret.
أنتم ميدانا. الرجل اللي يعملون.
The god was walking on the beach with his dog, which was pure white, when the animal nibbled on a snail. Its mouth turned purple. Wiping the dog's mouth with a cloth, its master realized that it wasn't blood that he saw, but a particularly beautiful colored liquid. The Phoenicians had a second star export, their writing. Wherever there is trading, things have to be written down to mark goods, keep accounts, and record events. For this reason, the Phoenicians developed a writing system made up of individual letters, an alphabet. It was the first alphabet in the world. The Phoenician alphabet was a hit. Who wanted to learn hundreds of hieroglyphs or think about whether a cuneiform symbol should be read as a word or a syllable? In Phoenician, every letter stood for a sound. That was easier, and the letters could be used to write different languages. Priests, scribes, merchants and tradesmen took the new writing to the whole Mediterranean world. Every people developed their own letters from it. Many alphabets today are derived from Phoenician: Hebrew and Arabic, Greek, Cyrillic, and Latin. Through the expansion of the Roman Empire, the Latin alphabet finally reached the Germanic peoples in Northern Europe. This means that through a long journey in space and time, the Phoenicians brought writing to all Europeans. Nevertheless, only a few traces of this talented and adventurous people remain. For this, the Romans are to blame. They had friendly relations with the Carthaginians for centuries. But then they decided to destroy Carthage. Rome, an ambitious upstart, had conquered Italy in the 4th century BC. Carthage hindered Rome's further expansion. Conflict was inevitable. The First Punic War broke out.